Welcome back. We are joined today by Ian Proud, a former British diplomat who served as the economic counselor at the British Embassy in Moscow between July of 2014 and 2019. So thank you for coming on the program. You wrote this article recently on the scale of the so-called Bussification in Ukraine, which is the forced conscription. I wanted to speak more with you on this topic because how severe do you see the situation being in terms of this um, uh, conscript? Sorry. How serious is it? Sorry, I'm gonna have to cut this
Okay.
because that didn't work out at all. So, how serious is the situation on the forced conscripts?
Well, it seems to be getting worse and more extreme over time. I mean, it started really the back end of 2022, 23, but it seems to have increased a lot, and more videos are now appearing online about this. You often see people posting videos on X about this kind of one-off videos, but there are now over 4,700 videos of situations like this. Most of them have been posted this year, which suggests two things. It suggests first that more people are taking videos, but it also suggests that the number of these instances is growing as well at the same time. And they're often quite harrowing videos, that you often see relatives and friends fighting with the recruiters to kind of try and stop their friend, son, whatever, being dragged away into a minibus. There have been videos where one situation in Odessa where protesters actually overturned the minibus in the street to try and prevent it being used. You've seen recruited shooting with sidearms at a running away potential conscript. You've seen videos where conscripts actually die on the video because they're being choked to death, on the ground with ever more harsh kind of tactics. It's really quite worrying. And of course, that goes alongside the sort of also accelerating rise in the number of desertions from the Ukrainian army.
Well, some of the media focus has almost been forced on this because, well, I think it was only a few days ago where you had Angelina Jolie, for example, being in Ukraine, and they snatched her Ukrainian bodyguard pretty much in front of her. But there was also this instance with the British newspaper. I'm not quite sure which one it was.
The Sun, it was the Sun's defense editor, Jerome Starkey, and their press vehicle was actually commandeered by three armed men, and they were forced to drive to the recruitment center with their Ukrainian employee, who worked for the Sun, on board, and then taken away and forced into recruitment against his will. With the Jerome Starkey unable to change that, and he even apparently in his article he contacted the Ukrainian colonel that he knew and got a very stiff response saying, well, he should be happy to fight for Ukraine, and that's the response he got from his so-called colonel friend in the Ukrainian army.
The brutality in which these people are pulled into the military, it does contrast with the expressions of sympathy, which we usually see in the media towards Ukrainians. It seems that the only time there's some sympathy is when it can be converted into escalating the war. But now that you see the brutal treatment of Ukrainians, it's not that much interest for the media, it seems. Or how are you assessing the Western media's
I think
coverage?
I think it's getting harder and harder to ignore. There has been some coverage of it, even in the UK media. Obviously, the Sun article was particularly kind of graphic. Let's see if we see anything on the Angelina Jolie's body card. But the Financial Times kind of talked about this about a year ago, and at that time, Rustem Umerov, the Ukrainian defense minister, said, "Well, we're going to phase out busification, and we're going to have more recruiter-friendly kind of techniques, online registration, giving them better allowances, and letting them pick their own units." And this was a year ago, and clearly nothing has really happened, and the situation has actually got worse, despite the Ukrainian government, I think, fobbing off, Western newspapers to kind of keep them sweet and on side. Actually, it's got even worse since that time.
One also see the pressure almost going the other way. That is, instead of being more lenient, there's some newspapers, large ones, that are pushing for the idea that Ukraine should begin to conscript even younger men to have a greater pool to source people from. But you also see some reports across the West, at least from Poland, Germany, and other places where they suggest we should start looking at the deporting some of these young men because it's their duty to go and fight for their country. Again,
Yeah. I mean, Poland is a classic example of that. Radek Sikorski has been saying that for quite a long time. He's one of the most pro-war Europeans you can find outside of the Balts. And he was talking about taking away the welfare benefits, making them go back to fight for the only reason, really, that actually, Poland doesn't want to send its own troops to fight and is happy, to send back these kind of poor, hapless Ukrainians to do so. Because the longer the war goes on, the longer it will take for Ukraine to join the European Union, which is a big problem for Poland economically.
Yeah, that seems, the stand with Ukrainians, support the Ukrainians. It seems applied in all areas, but they won't be let into the European Union. We're happy to, deport Ukrainian refugees to fill up the trenches. It seems very selective where we seek to have empathy and stand with them, though. But this kind of reflects a wider problem, though. This didn't come out of nowhere. The elephant in the room, obviously, is this massive manpower problem they have in the Ukrainian army. How do you assess it? How do you assess it?
Well, as I said earlier, I mean, the problem of desertions from the Ukrainian army has gone up. They clearly are struggling to maintain the level of forces on the front line that they need. Apparently, at any given time, there's about 350,000 out of the total contingent of 1 million, troops on the front line. But really, since the war started, more than 200,000 troops out of a total strength of 1 million have deserted. A fairly small trickle in 2022-23. It went up to about 8 to 9,000 in 2024. And this year, that number was already surpassed in the first half of this year. The 89,000 figure is over 100,000 people. So, I mean, more and more Ukrainians are deserting and running away because they don't want to fight and potentially die or have their legs blown off in this war that could be ended. And of course, that runs in parallel with the greater number of Ukrainian people that want to see a negotiated settlement to the war, which is now 69%. Compared to just about 24%, I think, 3 years ago. And that's according to Gallup polling, Western polling organization, credible organization. And the number of people in Ukraine who believe that, Ukraine can fight and eventually beat Russia has gone down by the same amount. It's gone down from about 60 odd percent down to about 23%. Again, and so, but Zelensky isn't wanting peace. He still wants his billions. And I think Ukrainian men are saying, well, actually, we don't want to be part of this. We're going to desert. And for some of them, desertion involves being shot, for example, as they attempt to cross the border into Moldova, one sort of particularly high-profile case.
Well, that's what the problem of manpower, though, as you suggest, when the situation gets worse. Not only is there desertions, we see more soldiers surrendering. There's also spikes in casualties because there's more untrained soldiers, clearly not motivated if they had to be dragged out of their homes in order to
Yeah.
be sent to the front. But how sustainable is this, though? Because Zelensky, he decided to show some leniency, and in terms of men being allowed to leave the country, though that is the men below conscription age, between 18 and 22. And within 2 months, 100,000 young men just left the country now. This was, just left. I mean,
Mm.
it's at some point it's going to have to take its toll on the economy as well.
Well, it will. But I mean, first point before I get to the economy, I mean, that still leaves 23 and 24-year-olds that they could decide to kind of forcibly mobilize. And of course, the problem there is that actually their parents, their friends are going to be no more willing to let them be dragged off to the front than the parents of people who are 25 years and older. So the same videos that we see of buttification now are going to increase if they try and, recruit forcibly 23 and 24 year olds. And in fact, the Sun article about the buttification of their employee said that a lot of the men they saw, this recruitment center that they were forced to go to by 3 armed men who commandeered their vehicle, was mostly 40 and 50-year-olds. And their medical procedures were kind of rubber stamped. They said, well, tick, you're fit, even if they were really not fit. So it's a big problem for them. But economically, Ukraine's economy is functionally kind of bankrupt. And it doesn't have enough sort of, enough in it to kind of generate employment. Lots of businesses have closed down since the war has started. Its exports have kind of not kept track with its imports, so it has a kind of growing trade surplus. And as and when the war ends, it will need labor, right? West Germany grew basically from a big influx of labor after the end of the Second World War. That helped kind of turbocharge its economic miracle, really, after the Second World War. Well, those conditions, don't apply so well with Ukraine when lots of the young men have left and may not want to return. And of course, very many have been killed or seriously injured on the front line.
Yeah, I'm worried about the social upheaval though, because if you pressure this society even more, go after even more aggressive tactics to go after and snatching people off the streets, it's going to be very hard to keep anything that resembles political stability. But it does beg the question, though, how else can Ukraine solve its, or how can it solve its manpower problem overall? Because Kurt Volker, he suggested that the former U.S. ambassador to NATO, that the Europeans should start sending their troops because the Ukrainians can't, get enough people to fill the front lines. But do you see any other solutions there, or is this pretty much the end of the line? There's nothing else that can be done for Ukraine.
I don't see any other solutions. The Poles aren't going to send their troops, even though they have one of the biggest armies in sort of the EU and spend over 4% of GDP on defense. I mean, the Balts clearly don't have enough troops anyway, and actually neither do the French or the Brits. If we could muster 10,000 people each, then we'd be lucky. And in the past, we've declined even to do that. That leaves Germany, which has its own economic problems as well. So there's no other real source. And of course, as people have been saying since the beginning of the war, Russia just has a much bigger population. Yes, it has the same, maybe not as bad, but it has the same kind of demographic challenges that Ukraine has. But it still has 3.5 times more fighting age men, and young men from, generally speaking, poorer kind of backgrounds are still willing to step forward and offer themselves for service without the need for any sort of forced mobilization, which means that you've got cities like apparently Moscow and St. Petersburg, life is largely continuing as normal. I know a Russian man, he works in the city of London in one of the kind of big banks there, and he's recently, for the first time since the war started, been able to go back on holiday to Moscow without fear that he might be, conscripted. So Russia just has more people, and Ukraine doesn't. Ukraine has less people, and that basic mathematics, can never really be overcome. The only way to solve this problem for Ukraine is to end the war, obviously, and only then can Ukraine start to repair its economy and start to kind of rebuild. And European companies will be queuing up to invest, I suppose, if that happens. But European politicians are in no hurry to see that happen, because the big elephant in the room of Ukrainian membership of the EU suddenly will rear its head when the war stops, of course.
Yeah, it's well, if the Europeans could try to plug some holes, I mean, you said they could maybe cough up 10,000 troops, but there was a good point which was made by a French general I recently spoke to, who was making the point that if you go into a war with just a few troops, you don't enter a war if you can't win it, because once all those troops turn out dead, then what? Will you simply ship your dead home and accept a humiliating defeat? So it would have to be some kind of an escalation. And how do you escalate without the proper troops? It would have to be into more heavy weaponry. So it can't end well. So I don't see, despite what Volker believes, that we can just fill the Ukrainian ranks with Europeans. It's not going to happen. There's not the military capabilities, political will. But my last question was just, what do you make of Zelensky's comments? I mean, when you see on the battlefield, both the Russians and Ukrainian side tends to exaggerate their position, exaggerate the weakness of their opponent. But with the fall of Pokrovsk now, it's something very different coming from Zelensky. He's suggesting Pokrovsk is still in the hands of the Ukrainians. There's only a few Russians there. Kupiansk is being cleared of Russians. I mean, this is very crazy stuff. I mean, it's very easy to be disproven, and a lot of Ukrainians must be watching this and asking whether or not he actually believes this, or if this is just cheap propaganda. How do you make sense of these statements?
Well, I mean, Zelensky's increasingly kind of clinging on to power, it seems to me, and he'll say anything to basically keep his Western sponsors on side. But his remarks appear increasingly desperate. I mean, Pokrovsk is falling. Even widespread Western mainstream media have been talking about this for the past few days. The situation there is going to be dire, and of course, for Zelensky domestically, that is going to be a big morale dent for the Ukrainian people when that happens. I mean, there's still lots of Donetsk that hasn't yet been captured by the Russian army, but the fall of Pokrovsk after 18 months of pretty hard fighting will be a big blow. So he's trying to kind of make out that it's not such a bad deal, and they're still fighting on. But when the truth comes clear, and when if Russia does capture large numbers of Ukrainian troops in Leningrad, for example, then there's going to be a big problem domestically for Zelensky politically. Obviously, Budanov did his big knight on a white horse moment where he sent in special forces a week ago to try and sort of break the encirclement, which briefly worked, by all accounts. Well, when things go really bad with Pokrovsk, he can say, "Well, I did my bit," and of course, Zelensky is increasingly deluded because, as we all know, Budanov has now started his own political party. So, people even previously close to Zelensky are now sort of circling for position for when things go badly wrong. And I think the tide in political public opinion in Ukraine will increasingly turn against Zelensky after this kind of defeat of the bastion of Pokrovsk, which has held out for so long.
So you already see the military defeat manifest itself in these political divisions then in Kiev.
Yeah, very much so, very much. I mean, they're not new, the political divisions. What's different about the political divisions is increasingly we're seeing people who are in the Zelensky inner circle who are turning against him slowly, but purposefully against him. This is not the same as the governor of Odessa that he took the passport away from, or Petro Poroshenko that he sanctioned another oppositionists. It's going to be harder and harder for Zelensky to sanction and cancel those people who've been hitherto his closest aides in the war. And they know that, he knows that. And it's, we're starting to see the early stages of that dogfight where people are going to be thinking about how they get rid of Zelensky and put themselves in his place.
Well, thank you for taking the time. It's a great article, so I would recommend everyone to go read it on responsible statecraft. That is, the title was the Basification and forced conscription of the Ukrainians. So thank you again.
Yeah, most welcome. Always good to talk, Glenn.